Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. In this video we're going to talk about contact distances with handguns. Close retention shooting, contact shooting, point shooting from the hip, a bunch of different terminology. But it's a topic that gets practiced and taught in training. And it's something that comes up in conversation. People discuss techniques and principles of it, and when you might use it, when you shouldn't use it. And it's a safe practice. It's a good idea to know how to do it because you can't really presuppose the distance you'll be from your threat. And you can't really presuppose your ability to get distance from your threat before you have to use your firearm. If you're physically tangled up with someone and you're justified in using your firearm, there's safe ways to do that. Because this technique exists, anytime there's a technique that exists, there's also people who produce products for that technique to kind of give you an easier way to do it, or they're kind of looking for a gimmick. They may mean well, but their understanding of the techniques that can be used for, like what we're talking about now, close retention shooting, may not be as in-depth as they could be, so certain products come to be. A product that's popped up again, and I say again because the first time I saw this product was, the early 90s when I was still a teenager. It was on a 1911, is an impact device. It's something that fits onto the rail or attaches to the frame of a firearm and then shrouds the barrel. Because of the unlocking nature of semi-automatic handguns, if you apply a decent amount of pressure, it doesn't really take much at all, to the barrel or the slide of the gun, it will come out of battery. And when it's out of battery, it won't fire. It's just how the mechanical design of the firearm, at least most semi-automatics, the majority of semi-automatics work. Because of that, the impact device allows you to firmly press the firearm into an object and still be able to fire the gun. The impact device, the modern impact device, one I'm talking about specifically, I think it's the CX or SUX, or I'm not really sure how you pronounce it, has popped up on the Instagram, and I've had questions from it on YouTube. I wasn't just going to do a questions answered video about this, but I figured I should go a little bit more in depth because there's some techniques that you can use and some other technology that you can use that completely eliminate the need for this device. Getting into the specifics of the technique, there's a couple different ways to apply it. Usually what we use on the range is a poor medium to substitute for a human being. Even this 3D target isn't going to provide the same resistance, the same elasticity, same degree of motion, the same degree of movement as a real human being would, which is why force-on-force classes, especially weapon retention classes or any kind of grappling classes like you can get from ECQC, Craig Douglas, are priceless because they give you an avenue to practice this on a real human being versus using some kind of poor medium. But for isolating the skill and building the technique and the confidence in the technique, paperwork's great. So what I have is I have my human being. Now, there's a couple different techniques like I already said. One of the most important things to remember is your draw stroke is probably going to be one-handed. And while this video isn't specifically going into the minutia, if you will, of close retention shooting, we are going to address it because it's important to the video. What is my other hand going to be doing? My advice to you is do not practice for a default other hand action such as protecting the head. Think about what your hand could be doing. Your hand could be doing any number of things to include defending against strikes. Maybe you've got a thumb in this guy's eye, because if you're about to shoot him, it's okay to attack his vision. In fact, if you attack his vision, it may give you a little bit of advantage. That's, assuming that the situation plays out in real life the way that it may in your mind. You got to stay flexible, and you got to be prepared for the fact that maybe this arm doesn't work at all. But it's better to practice under the assumption that you won't have this hand available to help with your two-handed draw stroke. So perfecting your one-handed draw stroke from concealment or from duty carry or however you normally carry your firearm is super important. Now, when the gun actually comes out, the most important thing to do is create a rigid platform to shoot from, which means you don't want to be pressing the gun out so far that it may limp wrist the gun or induce some kind of malfunction because you're not stable or you're not confident in the technique. Some things I see in classes when we go over this technique is people aren't comfortable with it, but they're still trying to do it as fast as they can, and that's when they induce malfunctions on their guns. And that's not something we want to do. We want to take our time to build a stable platform and a stable technique so we're doing it correctly, so when we rep it correctly, which means if we ever have to, unlikely, super unlikely, but possible, we ever have to use this technique in real life, we get it right, because some mistakes you can only make once. My draw stroke technique, one-handed technique, is pretty straightforward. No matter the garment I'm wearing, although t-shirts are easier than button-ups because button-ups tend to give you a lot of resistance there where the buttons meet. Go low, roll, pin with thumb, and I'm going to come out with force in case I get some shirt caught in my hand like that. The gun for me is going to come straight back to here. Now from this position, because I'm left-handed, I got a little bit of a problem. My ejection port is close to my body, which means if I pull the gun back too far, I could induce a malfunction. I tend to roll the gun out a little bit. I index off the bottom of my rib cage or the edge of my hip. Some people come up to a high pectoral, and that's fine given the environment. Remember, we want to be aware of our backdrop as well as we can. One of the issues I have with high pectoral is it might bring the gun into his vision center. If I'm clinched up with a guy, the higher I bring the gun, the more likely he can see it. It's just kind of a risk versus reward situation. I'm not saying it's wrong to go to a high pectoral index. I'm just saying that it does increase the likelihood of your bad guy seeing the gun. And if he doesn't have a gun and you have a gun, he's probably going to want your gun. Again, we're getting into some very, very specific, almost semantic discussions about the technique. So some of the principles to remember is, like I said, lock the gun in, have a firm grip on the gun. We do not want to make contact with his body if we can avoid it, which is where the premise of the video is coming from, is if I do have to make contact with him, do I need an impact standoff device? The answer is no. I've got 0 standoff device on this gun. Once the decision to make has been shooting from retention is unavoidable, I've got some decisions to make. If I'm able, I want to create a gap so I don't have to make contact with him. If it's avoidable, I want to be able to shoot the gun rapidly from a position where I can shoot accurately even though I'm not using my sights. I'm kind of using eye-hand coordinated or body indexing shooting, or body aiming shooting, if you will. From this position, it's very safe to shoot this hand. Again, where is it going to be? For safety's sake, I don't want to be sticking it back here, especially if I'm not comfortable with the technique. But I also want to think about, again, the realism. Where's this hand going to be? What's it going to be doing? I don't want to have this default method. This is good to practice, but so is this and some other techniques of where that eye is going to be. Paper is a poor medium, but we work with what we got. From this position, it's easy to shoot rapidly and accurately. Once I deliver those rounds, hopefully he lets go of me or he stops doing whatever he was doing that was keeping me from getting distance. Now I can press back, get my sights, deliver additional fire if possible. If for whatever reason I can't get him off of me, if he is physically pressing his body into the gun to take it out of battery to where it won't work, there are a couple techniques I can use. One of them is something you can use on any firearm. The other one is kind of equipment dependent. If I physically can't get the gun off of him, he's pressing into it with his body weight, I can take my thumb, press it in on the back of the slide or to the left or the right of your hammer if you carry a double action, single action only. I'm going to press in hard. It's not going to rip my thumb off, but if I don't press in hard enough, it can bite you. The gun's going to work just fine. It does sting a little, obviously caliber dependent, but because physics is a thing and energy is a thing, and you understand how much energy is actually created with the fire of a round 9mm, 40, 45, whatever your chosen caliber is, it's not going to be so strong of a force that's actually going to remove my hand. Think about this is the same principle as a bolt action rifle. The bolt is closed and locked. There is no movement available, but it doesn't blow the gun up. It's not going to blow your hand off, especially with pistol calibers. As long as you're pressing in hard enough on that, you're not going to have any issues whatsoever. Now here is an equipment-based solution that completely negates the need for one of those standoff devices. It's a weapon light, and its primary purpose in life is to provide light. Because of the extended bezel, some extend more than others. Surefire, especially the Surefire V series, go out further than a lot of the other common lights. But this TLR1HL, I know sometimes I pronounce that wrong, so I wanted to make sure I got it specific. It gives me a standoff device. I literally can press it into him, and it's not going to press the gun out of battery. Again, this is just paper. I'm going to demonstrate on a hard object here shortly. But now, as I come out, even if he is making full contact, he'd have to be pressing in significantly hard. He'd have to have a very voluminous body that would completely engulf the firearm for me to run into the issue that would be created without the standoff device, which is him pressing the slide out of battery. It's a weapon light and a standoff device. So you get two options in one piece of tech. I can't really understand why anyone wouldn't want both options. Mainly, and there's always going to be a big discussion on whether you should put a light on your gun or not. My personal feeling is yes, you should, because sights need data under low light conditions. And if you can't get good data, you can't shoot. At least you shouldn't be shooting. Another reason for it is the fact that I can turn the light on or I can activate the light in whatever my chosen technique is, and I don't have to worry about losing my ability to control the firearm with my other hand. I now have two hands on the gun. Again, something I've talked about in other videos. With the weapon light, I can even press the weapon light system, and it's going to work all day long. Again, this is just paper, which, like I said, poor medium for what we're practicing, but it kind of underscores the point. And just because we're standing here talking about shooting from close retention, I figured I'd bring this up. Compensated guns. There's a belief that if you shoot a compensated gun from close retention, it will kill you, or it will set you on fire, tear a hole in the earth-space time continuum. All numbers of these mistruths, misinformation, and misunderstandings of what's actually happening. Compensated, why do you compensate a gun? Because it helps mitigate recoil. But that gas goes into an expansion chamber expands, or the gas expands, I should say, and it's usually vented straight up, which from a close retention shooting could be right underneath your chin. Right now I've got this gun loaded with 124 grain plus P, running the comp at close retention. You can still shoot from close retention with a comp gun. Even closer than that, it kind of feels like getting hit with hot sand. Obviously, could it create an issue for eye protection? Some of the stuff coming out of the gun getting in your eyes because it's directed up versus more out. That is a possibility. So again, carrying a comp on a self-defense gun is a risk versus reward situation. You have to understand the advantages and the disadvantages of the system. I'm not saying that everybody should run out and throw a comp on their self-defense gun. I'm saying if you do, even from this extreme situation, you can still shoot a comped gun from retention and you will not, in fact, get killed in the streets. All right, so here we are. I'm gonna use this door as my hard object, kind of simulating pressing the gun into a human being. Again, the door is harder than the majority of people are going to be because it's a very solid object and people tend to be a little squishy, some more squishy than others. But this is worst case scenario. The human body may not deliver enough force to the frame of the slide of the firearm, I should say, to actually force it out of battery. But let's go worst case scenario, just because we're talking about making this contact and talking about do we need an impact device. So if gun's chambered up, ready to go, if there's a sufficient force pressing back on the gun, I have a dead trigger. The trigger works, but it doesn't shoot the gun. If I can come off just a little bit, the gun works fine. No big deal. But if it's pressed in here and they're pressing against the gun itself and I can't get it into battery, this is where bringing that thumb in and pressing in hard on the back of the gun helps me shoot. Obviously, it can induce malfunctions when you're clearing the problem. So that's why your malfunction clearance drills are so important. See, brass in there backwards. So getting off of that person, again, this is one of the situations where it's hard to train for it, it's hard to practice for it, and it gives you atypical situations such as this brass in backwards. No traditional malfunction clearance technique is going to get that brass out of there. Kind of it's a separate topic, but I will talk about it a little bit here in a minute. So that just kind of proves my point. Even if you don't carry a weapon light on your gun, you don't necessarily need to add an impact device because you have options. And if you're going to add an impact device, why don't you just put a light on your gun? So here's the malfunction we had, in case you're not familiar with it. It's when the casing, spent casing, or even a live round sometimes goes into the chamber backwards. Since there's no neck, there's nothing for the extractor to purchase on, which means you can rack this gun all day long, and instead of making it better, you're literally going to make it worse. So again, not the topic of the video, but it does drive home the point that a collection of the most horrible circumstances can occur all at the same time. I've got to shoot a guy from retention, and the method that I may be forced to use induces a malfunction that maybe I'm not familiar with or that can't be easily cleared with the proper malfunction clearance techniques. There's a couple different ways to approach this. Majority of them involve tools. Grab a pair of pliers or a pocket knife or something like that and work that casing out of there. That's obviously something that's not going to occur quickly. At this point, if you're in this proximity to your threat, you've only gotten off one round, you're not really going to be, hold on man, I'm gonna work on this and I'll get right back. Oh no, I hit the slide release. Okay, just give me, hold on, just hold back for me. I'll go ahead and, oh, I had a knife. Or I can use the gun as an impact device, bludgeoning weapon. But as you can see, there is no remedial cool guy technique to clear this type of non-typical malfunction. Pliers work really well. If you don't recognize the malfunction that's occurred and you attempt to clear it like you would a traditional double feed, because that's kind of how it's going to present. It's either going to look like a stovepipe or present like a double feed. Like I said, you're going to beat it in there and make it worse. This is why practicing malfunction techniques, malfunction drills, and working on non-typical, set this thing up for yourself and see how hard it is to clear. It's not something you're easily going to be able to do, especially if you've beat it in there with the slide a couple times. Best way to clear this, fastest way to clear this is a pair of pliers. Second best way, like I said, get your pocket knife and start working against that case wall and try to pry it out of there. But it's not something, as you can see, keep hitting the slide release, hold my knife again, there you go, buddy. And it's going to create additional problems that can't be readily solved. And unlike in a range environment, when I've got all day, I can go back to the truck or to the workbench or to the shooting table or whatever and work on this. Under real life threat, what's my next option? And to drive home the point, because range ammo isn't training ammo or isn't carry ammo, 124 grain plus P plus, the technique still works. Obviously, you're getting a little more blowback off of the object you're pressing the gun against. Malfunctions are still a thing. They can still happen. Starting to think the extractor on this gun's going. But full contact, thumb against it, gun still works. Or I could just save myself a whole lot of heartache and carry a very useful tool on my firearm if my firearm, my lifestyle, my carry position supports it, or my department allows it. With that weapon light, I have to press in at a very extreme angle and even come off the light itself in order for it to drive the gun out of battery. But just making contact, incidental contact at any one of these angles, the angle has to be so severe, so extreme in order for that slide to make contact with my bad guy, or in this case my object, that it's something I could easily correct with small angles of my wrist. If I make contact and for some reason the slide's out of battery, I can rotate the gun down, left, right, whatever I've got to do in order to remove that obstruction and allow me to shoot as much as I need to shoot. And just to cover the topic, because I want to revisit it, comp gun, again, I'm not going to get set on fire. I'm not going to tear a hole in space-time continuum. I may still have to use that technique because in this case the comp sits farther than the light, but I can shoot from close retention on this hard up and it works just fine. In closing, an impact device that you add to your gun. It's going to give you the ability to keep the slide in battery if you, in the unlikely event that you have to press your firearm into a threat. But it doesn't do anything else except for act as an impact device. You can hit people with it, and, you know, if you need to or whatever, but you can do that with the gun anyway. Our thumb technique, again, with the impact device, I'll be able to fire multiple rounds without worrying about the slide being pushed out of battery by my threat. But I can do the same thing with a weapon light. And the impact device and the weapon light are roughly going to be the same cost depending on which brand you're going with. You look at the popular impact device, that's CX or whatever, and then you look at a Streamlight, TLR HL, they're roughly the same price. And the impact device can try as hard as it wants and it can't actually produce light. So you get two advantages versus one advantage, holster issues, and God knows what else can happen. My personal advice is if you're really, really worried about something like this, just get a weapon light. If you're willing to carry an impact device on your gun, what's really the problem or your hesitation with adding a weapon light? Unless you're one of those people that has trained at the camp or worships at the idea that the guy's going to shoot at the light and he's going to hit you and you're going to die. And my personal feeling with that is that's people who are using light incorrectly, or they've never actually had a low light class, especially one that was taught correctly. There's a lot of way more myths and misinformation out there about weapon light and low light shooting than there is anything else. But back to the point. My personal feeling of the impact device is they're stupid. And they're stupid because you can get the same performance out of a weapon light, which is also a light. And that gives me two advantages instead of just one potential advantage. And being perfectly realistic, although I can't predict the kind of self-defense situation you might find yourself in, I'd say it is a little bit less likely that you're going to have to make a contact shot than it would be for you to make a shot at like 3, 5, 7, 10, 15, 20 meters. And I think you're probably going to be able to use the weapon light a little bit more than the impact device. And of course there's a lot of holster options available for it already, so that's good too. But when it comes down to the just reality of it, and again, we're talking about a lot of very potentially unrealistic stuff in this video. You can have to shoot someone with retention, but the number of people I know who've actually done it is pretty small. The number of cases I've seen where it's actually happened is pretty small, which means it can happen. And just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't. But most likely to least likely gear, I'm going to go with the weapon light because most likely gives me light, least likely gives me that impact device. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.